Welcome everyone to another live Kava session on the Polynesian Eyes podcast. We're here, Tua and Mr. Atearoa, all the way from New Zealand. Really, as we mentioned, we're going to go through a video that Grok shared with us on, some of the major points to say on the Tui Manua, and also some of the concepts and history in Samoa.
For the Tangaloa Langi, the progenitor of Langi Tuaiva. And that house was built by the Tufunga for the Tangaloa Langi, the progenitor of Samoan. And the house was thought to have been thatched in red feathers.
So that's pretty interesting, right? Because the same thing in Tonga, red feathers were very special.
Signifies high rank, yeah.
Yeah, and what I don't understand is his comment of Tangaloa being the progenitor of the Samoans, but then he says there's a group that came 3,700 years ago, and then Tangaloa doesn't show up until 1,000 years after that first group, but then he says Tangaloa is the progenitor of Samoa.
Yeah, the Tangaloa.
Let's see. Yeah, let's listen to it one more time because that didn't make sense to me.
And the house, Fale Ulam, the word means Fale house. Ulam. Currently, that second arrival was when the Tangaloa clan arrived in Samoa.
Alors, on remonte bien sûr dans l'histoire que les Samoa sont arrivés sur les îles de Samoa.
Looks like he asks a question, so we'll listen to that question.
Faisait partie d'une communauté entre Samoa, Tonga et Fidji. On parle de commerce, on parle d'échange entre ces structures-là. Et qu'il y a 800 ans maintenant, qu'il y avait un nouveau peuple, une nouvelle religion ou croyance, mais on dit que le clan de Tangaloa est arrivé à peu près à 800. Et là, on voit des personnes qui avaient un ADN qui était différent. Hein. Alors, on dit mixture que nouvel ADN, nouveau peuple arrivé sur les lieux.
I feel like I'm already in Paris
and
now.
On that account, we have a lot of oral history, stories about the Tangaloa clan arriving in Manua, in the coast of Manua, in a place called Lefanga.
Oh, I must have gone
That's
back
quite
way
clear
further.
in the chants from Manua. And they arrived in Manua, the Tangaloa clan, and some of the clan people were builders, Tufunga Faufale. And they thought to brought the first sacred house called a Faleula to Samoa.
On revient encore dans l'histoire.
Yeah, I must have gone further than I thought.
Langi Tuaiva. And that house was built by the Tufunga for the Tangaloa Langi, the progenitor of Samoan.
See?
And the house was thought to have been thatched in red feathers.
See, and that's what I don't understand. He just said, that the Tangaloa came 1,000 years after, but then now he says that they're the progenitors
of Samoa.
Yes, and that doesn't quite make sense to me personally.
Okay.
So I don't know. I any thoughts on that, Masi?
No. The star mounts, to be honest. See, I don't know. See, they need to create a word because you can't call it Purimele for everything because that worship thing with the post actually in Savai, that seems to have some significant purpose to me, and I can see maybe some keeping some tradition of the old religion in some kind of way. But these little ones that they have throughout, like what they say, Manono, Upolu, maybe all the way up to Manua and Tutuila, they seem like it's either a marker for something or snaring pigeons like they have in Tongatap or something, because it doesn't seem that it's really that important. That's just me from what I've
Yeah.
been observing, because one little like from the ground level to one little step to go on top doesn't seem it's makes it that
Doesn't
significant.
seem significant, right?
Yes, that's just me.
Yeah.
That's just me.
No, I that's what surprised me about it when I saw it. I thought it'd
Mm.
be at least like 3 feet, 4 feet off the ground, maybe. But hey, Kingpin,
Hey,
Malo,
what's up,
welcome,
Kingpin? Been
welcome.
a while. Been a while.
Yes. So let's continue here and see what he says. I'm trying to skip Mr. Paris.
Tufunga, they weren't called a Tufunga then. They were called Sa Tangaloa, meaning that they were sacred to Tangaloa, the people who built the house. And when they finished building the house, they celebrated the house by having an ava ceremony. And in that ava ceremony, the Tufunga were gifted a title, the Tufunga, and the word Tufunga comes from the bag of tools. The
Mm.
bag of tools, the Tufunganga, which held secret knowledge or the secret of making a sacred house.
Any thoughts on that?
Interesting. First time to kind of hear how the word tufunga came. Uh, no, nothing. That's something new. Never. I've
Yeah.
never. I don't have my own opinions on how tufunga actually the origins of where it came from. So thought that was interesting. Something
Well,
new.
and that's what also makes, because they're saying the Ava ceremony was introduced when Tangaloa came, right? Which, from our position, Tangaloa existed on Tonga for thousands of years before the Tui Tonga,
Mm-hmm.
and we do take the position that the Tui Tonga Tangaloa instituted the Kava ceremony with Aho Etu and his brothers. Seems like somewhat of a similar story going on there, there's later on he talks about a similar thing that reminded me a lot of Aho Etu's story.
Yeah.
Um,
Of the first
but
tufunga.
yeah, but right now, if this timing is, around the time of the Tui Tonga, and that's when the first Kava ceremony was instituted,
That's
I
probably a
don't
tufunga.
know.
Then not a
That's
Tangaloa.
what we're getting to. I mean, that's
And
what
then
I'm thinking.
well, what makes me think about that even more to our most recent episode, that we're saying that the Tui Manua clan is during the era of the Tui Tonga. So
Yes.
yeah,
And
I
that's
just thought
that's
that was
the
interesting.
more and more we have these discussions, the
Mm,
more I'm starting to think like, dude, there's a legitimate chance that the Tui Manua did not descend directly from Tangaloa. I mean, maybe it was from the Tui Tonga himself. I don't know. I'm starting to lean that way a little bit.
They instigated what is called a king, the Tui Manua. And from there was the Tui Tonga, the Tui Fiti, uh, Tui Atua, Tui Ana, other areas of Samoa, including at that time Tonga and Fiji. And the Tufunga, who were the holders of the Tufunganga, the sacred tool bag, they came to Manua and they secretly built a faleula for the Tui Manua.
On le disait bien sûr.
So so that's, well, once again, the timelines don't seem to line up, right? Because
mm,
they're saying, 1,000 years after the first Samoans, Tangaloa comes around,
yeah,
300 to 300 AD to zero. But we're starting to see that the Tuitonga may have been in the BC period from some of the other observations on archaeological sites at the third settlement of the
mm,
Tuitonga. So
mm-hmm,
several Tuitongas after Ahoetu, and they're saying they instituted the Tui system,
yeah,
which, Tui Tonga, the Tui Pulotu, whatever, which the Fijians dispute. The Fijians say that Tui is a Fijian word. That's what
mm,
I'm seeing online in a lot of the comments. that they're saying that the Tui term comes from Fiji. This is why we have to kind of have conversations about this, because people are just running around saying their own stuff. It's like, well, not everybody can be right. We can't say that Tui term comes from Samoa, right? And then the Fijians say no, it comes from Fiji. Like we gotta at least have some conversations about it. But from my perspective, the timing doesn't seem right. Do you know of, so they make it sound like Tangaloa existed at the same time as the Tui Manua.
That's what it sounds like.
Yes, because now he's saying that the Tufunga built a sacred house for the Tui Manua without the Tangaloa's knowledge, like secretly did it,
Yeah.
right?
I don't.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure on how you're going to, so the way to hear that is that they existed at the same time.
That's
Which,
interesting.
yeah, do you have any hearings or background on that, Masi?
Uh, no, no, because see, and that's the thing. We we believe that it's a title, Tangaloa. It's a title, and then once that title was kind of diminished, it sprung forth the Tui Tonga. So they didn't exist at the same time, and
Yeah.
that's probably like what you mentioned. The timeline seems like it doesn't fit because he's making it sound like the Sa Tangaloa family were in existence at the same time with the Tui Manua being created, but they were still there. And then to me, it doesn't see, and that's the thing, it doesn't make sense because why would the Tui Manua still exist and then have full authority when they sprung up from the person, the Tangaloa, that's still being there? That's
Yes.
funny. And it's either that his definition is probably different, and like I said, they're they're not too sure of how that power balance happened, or if it was balanced between back and forth. But I mean, it makes sense for our perspective that Tangaloa existed to a certain point, was done with, sprung for the Tuitonga. Tuitonga kept going. It created the Tui Hatagalawa, but then it changed the responsibility as being more of the old religion keeper. And then the
Hmm.
Tui Hatagalawa continue with the normal affairs of kingship of the Polynesian Empire. Tui Hatagalawa gets tired, creates with his son, the Tui Kanupolu. He joins the Tui Tonga of more giving responsibility to the Tui Kanupolu and kind of go. See, that makes sense. It
Yeah.
didn't. It doesn't. This one doesn't really. It's not too clear, and I feel like the reason why it's not too clear, the timeline is off, like what he mentioned earlier. So
Yeah.
it's too
And
early. Like the dates he's referring to are the timeline of the Tuitonga, but he's talking about Tangaloa. But we know Tangaloa is way before. Tangaloa is way before.
yeah, thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing. I hear a lot from our Samoan brothers that the Tui Manua was super special, right? But then it also says that the Tangaloa not only instituted the Tui Manua, but also instituted other Tuis in Samoa. That's what he said earlier.
Mm.
So what made the Tui Manua special versus the other Tuis that were installed? I mean, there's some interesting questions there, but we'll continue with the video here.
Mm.
The Tangaloa Langi, the progenitor, when he discovered that the Tufunga had done this, came to Samoa, destroyed the house, and scattered the men. So Samoa have this tradition where the Tufunga are thought to be their relations. They are the people from heaven, from Langi Tuaiva, and therefore they were considered not Samoans. They were foreigners. And we have a system in Samoa. Before you commission a tufunga, there are a whole lot of rituals that allow the tufunga to be looked after and protected by the families who are commissioned the tufunga to build them a house. And after the house was built, there's a ceremony to almost throw the tufunga out of the village or the family.
Hmm.
So The Tufunga secretly build a house for the Tui Manua. Tangaloa gets angry, comes in, and banishes them. And so, number one, that confirms what we were hearing earlier, that they're saying that Tui Manua is the same time as Tangaloa.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't sound like Tangaloa is very happy with the Tui Manua, if this story is correct. See, this is the problem of having only oral history
Yeah.
without any type of ruins or physical
Mm,
markers to tie the oral history to.
yeah.
Because I've never heard this from other Samoans saying this. They all just say, "Oh, Tui Manua descends from Tangaloa, and that's the greatest thing on earth." And then Homeboy over here is saying, "No, actually, the Samoan oral history says that Tangaloa
Yeah.
lived the same time as Tui Manua and was, Tui Manua was doing secret stuff that Tangaloa didn't like, blah, blah, blah."
Yeah.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
don't know. It's a little bit all
No.
over the place.
No, 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 no. And this is good. This is a good example, Tua, of the weakness of oral history, right?
Mhm.
Because you cannot. It's very messy, and you can't discern on which one is the true one, because there's no archaeological evidence to kind of prove there is that this person do live here. And that's the thing. Then you have certain segments of groups just sharing their own stories, and I think it's it's interesting that Atangaloa would still coexist with the Tui Manua, because yeah, I mean, unless his Tangaloa is just a family that somebody just took the name and just existed, but it can't be the same Tangaloa that is the founder of Polynesia's people and way of life. So I don't know. I find that interesting, Tua. I don't know.
Yeah. Because the time, number one, the timelines are off. And number
Mhm.
two, the only way that you can justify the Tui Manua living at the same time as Tangaloa is the Tui Manua is just like another governor
Mm,
over an island on behalf of Tangaloa. And that's what it sounds like here, right?
mm,
Assuming it's a Tangaloa, right? That is,
yeah,
if we give them benefit of the doubt and they say, hey, the Tui Manua comes from Tangaloa, let's say from the Tokatufa,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Let's say he descends from Tangaloa. Like we talked about, this was a common practice where you would have a child with Tangaloa, bring him back to the island you come from, and that becomes a ruler. Let's just concede for argument's sake that becomes the Tui Manua. That is just a governor of that place, and so it sounds like to me Tangaloa does not live in Samoa according to this story, because what happens is the Tui Manua does it, builds it with the Tufunga that the Tangaloa brought, and then when Tangaloa finds out, he comes to Samoa and rectifies the problem.
Mm,
That tells me two things, or at least from my perspective: Tangaloa is not living in Samoa because he says he comes to Samoa. Number two, that says that the Tui Manua is not as quote unquote heir of the Tangaloa title itself. And
mm,
so there's some issues with that, like this whole idea that the Manua Empire, well, sounds like the Tui Manua was just having a hard time being obedient to Tangaloa and
mm.
doing what he was supposed to do. So how can we say he had an empire? I don't know.
No, interesting. Interesting. Yeah. It's hard to it's hard to make sense and organize what exactly is going on, because the time, yeah, like what you said, it's too early. This got to be a lot further back if we're talking about if we're talking about Tangaloa as being the Tangaloa that we all know, the founder
Yeah.
of Polynesia.
So here's another comment here from Brown Monk talking about the sacred bag. Wow, that's interesting. Brings to mind the sacred bag of the ancient Sumerian hieroglyphs. And they also have hieroglyphs in the Americas.
Mm,
Um, that says that as well. They were said to have tech and move and cut big stones. They have a similar carving like that in the Americas as well. I don't know if you've seen it, Masi. It's
no,
like
I haven't.
these bird kind of looking, kind of weird looking things, and they all carry a bag,
Mm,
and they're all carrying a bag, and they have it. Um, uh, they both have it in the Sumerian area and also in the Americas, a similar type carving.
Okay.
See, what a bears! We're gonna give you a full bucket, not a cup for you, a full bucket.
Too funny.
Why?
Too funny.
Oh, I still have it on mute. Sorry.
Before the sacred house arrived in Samoa, that the Tangaloa's daughter came to Samoa, married one of the Samoans, and the daughter asked Tangaloa Langi for a house. So Tangaloa sent his Tufunga, and in those times, the Tufunga would build the house at night,
This is a funny story.
and the house would be built at night, and the family were instructed that when they come to feed the tufunga, they have to make a lot of noise. And when the women at one time to come to feed the tufunga, they didn't make the noise. They wanted to see why it was so secretive, and they witnessed that the men were naked, completely naked, and also they used their teeth to gnaw the trees and the pieces of timber for the house. And when the tufunga saw that they were being looked upon, they fled back to heaven. So there's always this idea of tufunga as an extra
Foreigner.
person or a person
Yeah, kind of like
foreign to Samoa.
this is very similar to like the Sumerian histories of these, was it Anunnaki or whatever, that they were these foreign celestial beings that brought technology to
Mm.
Earth. So kind of, I don't know, kind of interesting. I don't know. This is one, like we said, this is one of the challenges of oral history. It gets a little funky sometimes. I don't know. Any thoughts, Mussy, while we wait for Mr. France to do his translation?
No, yeah. I mean, yeah. He's starting to lose me a little bit. It's just getting a little in fairy tale land a little bit. Like logically, it's not making sense. I mean, of course, because we all hear stories and this and that, and then you try to make sense of it. What actually could happen? But yeah, I don't know. I'm sure these are his stories that he's gathered, and he's just sharing it, and it's interesting. That's all I can say to
Well,
That's all I
and
can
once
say.
again, this is the thing that I don't know. It's kind of exhausting, and like I don't know if it's exhausting or annoying when we hear all the stories of the Tui Pulotu and the Tui Manua, and it's like, where's your evidence? And I'm like, dude, there is more evidence for the Tui Tonga than we can think of, especially when we look at what quote unquote evidence is for the
Mm,
Tui Manua and the Tui Pulotu. What is it? Oh, some oral history about people chewing on some trees and running around naked at night. Is that what you're
yeah,
telling me is the evidence? Like
yeah,
all it is a list. Look at how easy it is for our brother Vili from Fiji to come up with a Tuipulotu list. You're gonna come and tell me that coming with only oral history and a quote unquote pedigree line, that's the evidence. And then you go to Tonga, and yeah, we have a line, but then we also have that guy lived on this langi and is buried at that langi. Then they stayed here for 3 generations. Then they moved here. Then they moved there. Blah blah blah. Oh, people seeing the Inasi coming from
mhm,
multiple islands from Polynesia. Even a foreigner who showed up to Tonga happened, Captain Cook happened to witness it with his own eyes. We have drawings of it. We have the studies on the stone. We have the
correct.
Ha'amonga. We have, forts built by Tongans in Fiji, in throughout Polynesia, and even similar building styles in Easter Island. And these people have the audacity to say, "Where's your evidence?" I'm like, dude.
Mm,
And then when
mm,
I say, "What's your evidence?" Oh, we have 60 Tu'imanuas named, 45. I don't know.
mm.
I'm
No,
kind of
no,
starting to ramble there, but I'm just kind of
yeah,
like,
no,
what in the world?
no. This story, and like I said, this oral story. There, and that's the thing with the oral stories. You're trying to figure it out. We're able. This story reminds me of remember the story of how Adu and the mother, how he becomes to be how Adu, how he climbs up to meet his
The Toa
father,
tree. Yeah.
going to heaven, climbing to the tree to get to it's that thing, and we were able to kind of say, okay, that's just a story, but this is what the real definitions are.
Mhm.
Langi is actual location, Toa is where you kind of come up upon the Langi, and that's how we made sense of that, right? This one is getting and this is what it is. He's provided an oral story, but I don't know if he's I don't know if he's able or hasn't figured it out, or maybe somebody else can figure it out to kind of help us understand and break that
What
story
it's
down
really
because it's
representing.
too
Yeah.
fantasy. It's too fantasy like every other story we can hear. It hasn't been broken down to actually make
Yes.
sense. And also makes sense, but then there has to be archaeological evidence because the Langi we know because Langi is referred to actual location of Tangaloa and where Tuitongas lived, and it's still
Yes.
existence right now.
Today.
So that's why,
Yeah.
yes, and that's why we can make sense of our story, and because it's actually there. So yeah,
Yes.
that's the
And
problem.
from what I understand from Te Vitafare is the Tuitonga in Langi, right? In Tapuhia, where Tangaloa lived, there were specific names for different parts
Hmm.
of Langi where Tangaloa lived. When the Tuitonga, when Aho Eitu went to Tukutonga, which was
Hmm.
called Tonga at that time,
Hmm.
he duplicated the names. There was a part of the Tuitonga settlement that was called Feretoa. That was the part you enter to come to where the Tuitonga is living. And it duplicated a lot of the quote unquote, let's say, markers of what Tangaloa has, which is comes back to what you said. That's why we can make sense of Aho Etu's story because
Hmm.
it's been duplicated and repeated through the Tuitonga settlements over and over and over again. And when you don't have that physical marker or realization that's tied to an oral story, oral history, it like you said, you just start getting into weird places, and you don't know
Yeah.
how to tie yourself to reality.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, comment here by David that the Tonga Empire were the only ones to collect stone tools from all over the Pacific, and the stone tools they found in Samoa were only local, and
Yeah.
some goes to yeah. We discussed that on our last podcast, David, 100%, and that's scientific right there. That is pretty hardcore data. Hard to dispute that at that point.
Mm.
All right, let's continue.
The probably the best evidence that we have is a chant that says that Tangaloa Wi, his name, and his mother Wi. So he was the son of Tangaloa and this woman Wi. And Wi was a young girl who was sent to be sacrificed to Tangaloa, the sun, or it was considered to be the sun. And instead,
And this is here's another thing. This is how we tie Tangaloa being the sun, right? And being a god.
Hmm.
In Tonga, even to this day, the king is referred to as
The sun.
the sun. And so Tangaloa, the reason why he would be referred to as the sun is because that is the kingly title that he holds. As the Tangaloa, he was the title, the king, the king. And so when Ahoetu inherits or becomes the heir, that
Mm.
transfers over to the Tuitonga because it replaces the Tangaloa title. So now the Tuitonga is referred to as
The sun.
the son. And then now when the Tuitonga passed it on to the Tupo family or the Tuikanukupolu, they are now referenced as the son of
Sun.
Tonga. And that is a very important part, not only for that political structure, but also for navigation. The equator is referred to as Tangaloa's road because that is the path the sun takes. And so you start to hear these stories and you say, oh, he's from the sun. And then they say, yeah, he's a god because no one can live on the sun. That's not what the reference is, and it's tied to political um facts in Tonga and also to navigational knowledge.
Mm,
So that those are the data points
mm.
that ground the story on Tangaloa, and as we see here on Maui, because he's going to have an interesting definition of who Maui is because of this Tangaloa and we lady. So
Interesting. Interesting.
Tangaloa had a child with the young woman, and when the child was old enough, she escaped. And where they escaped from in the chant, it says north of Atafu. That's all we know. And you can make whatever you want north of Atafu. And he arrived and lived in inland in Manua in a place called this place escapes me now, but that's when Tangaloa we came down to one part of Manua and discovered there was a man called Kava already living there with his family. And that's where they had the very first, what we consider to be the very first Ava ceremony.
Hmm.
OK, alors,
any thoughts?
No, see, and this is it's getting confusing because he's saying it's the first Ava ceremony, but I thought he had a Ava ceremony when they were building the Fareula after. Let's see, and that's why I say it's messy and it's chronologically doesn't make sense.
Well, and
Um, yeah,
you
I
know
don't know, and yeah,
the theme. This is the theme, and let me hear your thoughts on this, Masi. This is the theme I'm getting. Tangaloa installs the Tui Manua. Tui Manua goes and builds a faleula without permission, gets in trouble. Right now, we hear here a Tangaloa has a child with a woman, but she has to
we
run away and hide, and then that becomes the Tangaloa. No, dude. When you're running for your life, you're not the Tangaloa. What I'm getting to is how come everything tied to Samoa is did something without authority, a woman running away with her life, with her child, and then the child becomes Tangaloa? That's
mm,
not what an heir would do. If
yeah,
that child is the actual quote unquote heir, you're
yeah,
not running for your life.
yeah,
So, what I'm getting to is that there's a lot of, when I hear these stories, they don't sound the stories of inherited from his father became Tangaloa.
hmm
They
hmm
did these things in the empire. Then he had a son who took on the name of Tangaloa. Blah blah blah. That's the empire.
mm,
I'm hearing a story of a lot of chaos. There's a lot of chaos. You cannot build an empire when there's chaos at home. That's what caused the Tuitonga Empire to start to fracture and disintegrate, was civil wars back on Tongatapu and
mm,
Hapai and Vavau, the challenging of power, the 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 fracturing back in the capital led to the fracturing of the whole empire. How is it that I'm hearing every story tied to the Tui Manua and all these oral stories and the quote unquote Tangaloas in Samoa? It is of dysfunction and of fracturing of power.
yeah.
How can you tell me that that is the launching pad for an empire? I don't know. That's the pattern I'm
Interesting.
starting to see.
No, interesting. And Tua, while he's speaking, and I'm trying to make sense. I'm really like, I'm kind of trying to make sense. I'm thinking the only way to have Tangaloa exist the same time was probably during the time of the Maui, and maybe he's referring to the Maui to the Tufunga. That maybe you, because I don't know. That's what I'm thinking. Maybe
No, dude, Masi, it's gonna get weirder for you.
okay,
Listen,
because that's what. Yeah,
listen to what he says next. Oh,
ah, OK, OK, OK. Alors, il y avait au début,
yeah. Because I'm thinking it could be the Maui because the Mauis were very, were very skillful, not only navigating,
industrious.
but
Yes.
yes, they were kind of like, and I can see Tangaloa, he's saying Tufunga, but I can see Tangaloa maybe asking one of the Mauis to do something or sell something or bring this. I'm trying to make sense, but I don't know if you, because yeah, I don't know because it doesn't make sense with his story to have to coexist during that timeline of
Well,
Tangaloa.
look at who he's going to call Maui, and it's tied to that child that we just mentioned.
Okay.
Atafu,
It's an island.
nord de Atafu. Alors voilà, il a quitté pour arriver sur Manua. Alors ça, voilà, c'est une interprétation nord de Atafu, arrivé sur Manua. Et quand ils sont arrivés sur Manua, ils ont découvert qu'il y avait déjà une personne qui était sur place qui s'appelait Pava. Et que c'est là qu'ils ont fait la première cérémonie du Hava, avec bien sûr
So the
Tangaloa
first Kava ceremony.
et Pava,
Mm.
arrivé sur Manua.
So Tangaloa was considered quite a trickster. So his name is, some people believe that his name is Tangaloa Maui. Tangaloa, and his name is a combination of Tangaloa and we, so Tangaloa Maui. And some people think it is Maui, Tangaloa Maui. So there is some, and he famously had the Kava ceremony with Pava, and Pava's son kept jumping up in front of the men. And he warned Pava for his child to behave himself. And when the child didn't behave, he picked the child up, cut him in two, and then Pava cried, and Tangaloa put the child in the kumete or the tanoa and resurrected the boy. So it's good. And then the Ava, now Samoa, we have this symbolically, we libate, or we pour a little bit of the kava on the ground in commemoration of this event, and also the very first Ava ceremony.
Like you said, it gets confusing.
Yeah.
Tangaloa
that
first comes
is-
1,000 years later. I don't know. This is to me evidence on
Mm.
why you don't want to just be on oral history. It gets
Mm.
complicated.
See, and this is the thing too. See, I don't know this guy, Lefiti, but like, in order for me to kind of really give sincere credibility to these stories, because he was pretty good with the, we're trying to understand the Pure Mere, especially the one in Hawaii, can understand that. But then you see now he's going solely on these oral history. I want to understand like what family he's from, where in Samoa, to really try to understand like the origins of Hamoa, Manua kind of thing. Because like I said, the story, it doesn't add up to the stories we know, and he could be just a professor, and these are just chants and stories what he's gathered and putting into understanding. But yeah, see, this is what I'm kind of running into. I would like to just understand which family, and kind of exactly where he's from. Is he from the Tafaifa family or the Tui Manua family, to kind of give these stories? Because yeah, it's hard to follow the story because it's a bit
It's
logically
all a
doesn't
bit of
make
it.
sense.
Do you notice the difference when he had a physical landmarker to tie the story to? The story was coherent, and we could
Yes.
understand it, and we could
Mm.
say, okay, it's based in some level of reality. The
Mm.
moment we moved away from a physical marker that's associated, then the things get weird.
Yeah.
Right? And this is what we're coming back to. This is why when we have these conversations with our brothers and sisters from Fiji, Samoa, and
Yeah.
even Tahiti and all those places, is great. Now tie this to something physically. Any major
Yeah.
empire, right, has physical markers. And when you have the
Yes.
physical markers, and they're connected, and even if it's like astronomical knowledge that backs up the oral history and the physical marker, then that's another level, right?
Yes.
Then you look at sophistication of the political system, the social system. You look at all those things, those are layers of evidence that, quote unquote, not a smoking gun, but at some point when you see the trend, you can kind of say, okay, individually they're not 100% guaranteed, but when you see a lot of the trends, then you can say, you know what, this has some good high level of confidence to think that way. So this is, like you said, this is where things get weird. What I'm going to skip to is this one, I believe, is when he starts talking about when the Samoan culture or the Ha'amoa culture. I'm going to try to work harder to say Ha'amoa, because I feel like every time we say Samoa, we're giving credence to some of the definitions of the word Samoa.
Mm.
But the Ha'amoa culture starts moving and abandoning some of the Sias and what that means. And we'll start with that.
To abandon the tia around between 500 to 300 years ago. We have no idea why they abandoned the living and building inland in these big mounds. And then what became very prevalent are the house form which have the pai platform, which are very low, no more than 2 meters high or a lot less.
Alors, on voit bien sûr cette
About 500 years ago, is that about the timeline where the Tui Tonga gets challenged in Samoa? And then all of a sudden, the large mound that had a house on top that
Gets neglected.
gets neglected because the Tui Tonga is no longer there. And so what happens? These smaller platforms get built.
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
And so that's what I'm saying. The more when you start tying it to physical features, then all of a sudden
Yes.
things make a little more sense.
Yes.
Now we can make
It's
sense
easy to
of,
follow. Yeah.
yes. Now he's starting to talk about things that somewhat make sense, and we can follow along on the explanation, and we can say, okay, around this time this happened to these physical structures where the big large mounds were not being used anymore, and then all of a sudden at the end of using the big large mound, these smaller mounds start coming together. And so he's going to talk a little bit more about that, and we'll get into that. But before we go to that one, Masi, any thoughts?
No, that makes sense because I can see why the Pulimere in Ha'amoa, especially in Savai, was probably during the time reign of the Tuitonga. Like reign, what I mean, because the Tuitonga was he still came back after that little, skirmish that happened, but he still came back, but he wasn't a ruthless uh, ruler in Savai and Upolu. But that made sense when he left. He left, and that became a time where smaller groups of the family created their own authority and power, which is the Matai system that is currently being practiced now. And they go to smaller from the Pule Malay. See, and that's the thing. Then it goes from Pule Malay, and they're calling it Star Mounts. I don't know if there's another name, but they're just using Pule Malay to cover all of it. When I think it could have been a different purpose, but
And that's what he's going to get to. Actually, he's going to start talking about, when you have a massive structure like that, especially out of stone, that screams consolidated power, right? There's one guy who's at the top of the mountain, and he wants everybody to know. At the end of using that, all of a sudden, smaller platforms that are all over the place, and he kind of gets into it a little bit of what political structure starts to show up at the same time as these smaller platforms start appearing in Samoa.
Obviously, a village structures which are very different than the more centralized structure around the tia. And they're involved with the idea, what I would suggest to be it became more devolved power, and the Matai system became more prevalent. Matai system were like a communal system of leadership.
Alors,
Pretty straightforward. I mean, it's starting to make sense, right? Tui Tonga, consolidated power. When he gets rejected, the Matai system, which is a more distributed power system, which fits into what we've said multiple episodes back, right? Samoa as a unified, quote unquote, nation, same thing with Fiji and other places, did not really exist. That we don't have a lot of history of a unified, quote unquote, Samoa. It was more distributed power. Same thing with Hawaii. It wasn't until Kamehameha the Great he unifies Hawaii. Our position sounds like the Tui Tonga who was the head of the Polynesian Empire, once his power decreases and the empire falls apart,
Mm,
then this distributed system of power starts to get established, including the Matai system. And we say it has a lot of backing because it's tied to a physical structure that shows up after the large mounds. Now
mm.
everything makes sense. When you
Yeah,
tie it to physical ruins, all of a sudden the story makes
sense.
sense. Any thoughts on that, Mussy?
No, no, just along the same lines as you, Tua. Smaller structures. I think that it resembles as a leader for a particular family that they've been appointed, or and this is where the Tuikan Polo was famous for the election. They were
Mm-hmm.
elected. They were elevated to this mound that they've created, and see, it makes sense with that big mound. That's why I said if they get and if they do the timeline, it goes back during the time of the Tuitonga residing in Haamoa, in Upolu and Savai. That that could have been a location that he would reside at or visit or do something, but it seems to
That's the
fit his
palace.
purpose. Yes, that seems to fit his purpose that that was built for to elevate him, and then he gives the explanation why, and that makes sense why that only mound is the biggest, the Purimere, while the other, yes, there's hundreds of them, but they're scattered and they're very small. Can be in Manono, can be in all over Polo, Tutuila, Manua. So yeah, I mean that's interesting. It's pretty straightforward. And see now it's kind of like he got my attention in the beginning. Then we were kind of like in fairyland a little bit. Now it's come back to like okay, this makes sense. We have some like what you said, some ruin, some physical structure to kind of go along. And this is why we don't dispute all of oral history. Then it kind of oral history kind of gives it meaning, gives it
Mm-hmm.
purpose, fills in the gaps of what they were used for. But
Yeah. But until you tie it with a physical aspect, it's very difficult to narrow down. There's some interesting comments we'll bring up here. Longo Longo or Rongo Rongo. I'm assuming that's like a Tahitian or Maori scripts are the only Polynesian hieroglyphs. Hey, Toahola, give some more context on that. Where is that found? These hieroglyphs that you're kind of referencing here. Another comment here. Oh, that's we already went through that one. Clyde Moore, there's a big chance that we all live amongst ruins of an ancient culture. The Tangaloas and the Mauis could have been the tail end. I lean towards this a little bit, Clyde Moore, and my thinking behind that is to be as sophisticated as Maui and Tangaloa
mm,
are, and we're gonna go a little bit into, and I might bring up the Furitaunga here because he's gonna start talking about the Kava ceremony here in a little bit. But I believe at some point the Polynesian Empire had written language, and I would believe the ones who probably had it were Tangaloa and Maui,
are we? Mm,
um, because that's the only way you can, number one, accumulate and maintain that kind of knowledge. And once you lose the writing, then you lose the engineering, then you lose a lot of the technology, right? Because you're just relying on oral history. Maybe something happened, like we can see inklings of the past by looking at the future and see what's duplicated. Like we mentioned before, something happened or was going on, had to have been going on when you look at why the Tangaloa line transitioned to the Tuitonga line.
mm,
And the best thing we can look at is what led from the transition of the Tuitonga line to the constitutional monarchy of the Tupou family or the Tuikanukupolu now. There was a significant change in the environment, a significant change in power structure, significant change in religion,
mm.
significant change in everything, that in order to adapt to the new environment, the Tuitonga line was created. Whatever that is or was, I don't know, but I definitely lean very heavily. Any thoughts on Clyde Moore's comment, Mussy?
That could be correct because it seems like a lot of the building and mass moving of structure happened during the Tangaloa and Maui's time. You know, of moving things. You know, it could possibly be, and then maybe see, and that's the thing. that knowledge was probably, instead of maybe if it, it wasn't passed over to many generations through the transition of the Tuitonga and to the other lines, because it started, because every transition, everything started fading, the
Hmm.
knowledge. And then when that was fading, more chaos happened, and that's why the empire really shrunk to pretty much to Fiji and Samoa, and then even shrunk to even to Tonga to now. So yeah, no, it's interesting. It's interesting. We don't know why. We don't know why, and that is that is interesting.
Not 100%. And here, Clyde, more additional comment. The Tongans or the Southerners would have been the only ones to maintain. And that's why we believe Tonga, another piece of evidence, right? Out of the many layers of evidence that Tonga was the center of the empire, because at the root is where the longest lasting structure you would expect it to be, right?
Mm,
If you get further on the branches, when the tree dies, the branches and everything is the first thing to
yeah.
wither away, the leaves, then the branches. The root is the last part
Mm,
that would die. And if there's any chance of survival, it would come out through the root.
root.
And that's something that I believe is what Tonga is, something that Tongans alone should not just be proud of. It should be all Polynesians,
Mm,
because that is the remaining part of our quote
history.
unquote country, our
Mm,
history, our culture, that every Polynesian should be proud about. Here's an
yeah.
interesting. Before we move on, Matt, any thoughts on that?
No, no, and I think you're right, because we are one people, and like they say, when Polynesia should be happy that a physical structure, and that what we were able to maintain at Tonga being independent is a win for everybody.
Hmm.
So, because if Tonga was gonna collapse too, who would know what the meanings of these ruins would have been? Because I'm sure if Tonga was colonized like a lot of the islands, I'm sure a lot of that knowledge would have been lost, of knowing what the purpose of the langis that are still there, even to the sun being the ha'amonga being a sun gate. So yeah, I mean it's a, like what you said, the root. It's really remarkable what Tonga had to deal with to survive. So
Here's hey, Water Bears is thinking very deep today. I think he's trying to make sure he maintains his visa to
mm,
attend the Kava sessions. Did the Tower Babel language confuse effect the early Polynesians too? I don't know. A lot of
I
people
don't know.
say that Polynesia was the last place to be settled, but it could have been waves of people. I don't, maybe
Mm.
not. I don't know. Any thoughts on that, Mussy?
No, 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 no thoughts. I'm not too sure.
10-4. Rapa Nui, aka Easter Island, is also where the Ahu. Yeah, he corrects it here.
Mm.
Tongariki, or Tongan chief stone statues are found. That one gentleman that went to Easter Island and videoed himself talked about. He's like, dude, I went to Tonga, saw the langis in Tonga. I'm looking at some of these ahus that are kind of
Moy eyes.
multi-tiered. Yeah, had the moais on them. He says like this looks exactly like the stuff he saw in Tonga. So
Mm,
could be Toa.
mm.
Any comments there, Masi?
No, I mean there's a strong possibility that that is the same kind of people that were in Tonga, because the structure of what Tonga has with the Ha'amonga and the Langis, they were doing the same thing in Rapa Nui. But to me, the question I have is why in Rapa Nui they were doing the faces only over there
Mm.
in Rapa Nui. So that's interesting. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, that
But I
is
don't know.
interesting.
I'm just thinking maybe they're doing the faces because it was close to Waihi. I don't know. Maybe these are the first people. I don't know. First people to come, and maybe just trying to remember the first people to come to the Polynesia from Waihi, and they were just doing their face structure. I don't know, but
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't. I'm not too familiar with this. Clydemore asteroid hit southern end of New Zealand, where affected seasons and created El Nino. And this was in 1200. Funny that the Tuitonga Empire grew at that time. Could be maybe that change. We're of the position that the Tuitonga may have started possibly even BC, Clydemore. But if
mm,
we're saying that at the height, it seemed like the height of the Tuitonga at its peak Not sure if maybe that asteroid changed the weather and people suffered, and then the Tuitonga was able to claim further power. Not sure. Just wondering if there's a coincidence of the hieroglyphs is called Longo Longo in a place in Kolomotua. Possibly. Sometimes
Mm.
these names are connected.
Yeah.
Hey, Ro Niwa, welcome.
Oh, new one. Hey, Tua, but isn't there evidence of those written form language that was found in Hawaii or somewhere?
Yeah, they found some hieroglyphs that are seem to be like the early starts of like the related to the Hawaiian triangular hieroglyphics
Yeah.
in Hawaii that they found in Ha'apai. Um, could be related, could be something similar, or maybe a Hawaiian that was brought over,
Mm,
remembering Hawaii while they were here. The Tuitonga brings them to Tonga, and
mm,
that
mm,
dude or gal is just trying to remember their homeland.
mm.
Just thought about that. No, good
Interesting.
point right here. Clyde Moore, scarcity creates conflict and famine. That's
Mm,
really what it sounds like. For I've heard some stories about how Pharaoh came into power, and
mm.
really it was in the time of Joseph
Oh.
because of the famine of the 7 years after the 7 years of plenty.
Mm,
Egypt was the only place that had food, that all the surrounding areas, quote unquote, kingdoms had to give up everything to Egypt. And Egypt got all its wealth and its power during the 7 year
ah.
famine. And some people say that that's how the Pharaoh came into power. Malo,
Mm,
malo, toa. We'll go on here to the next video. He's going to start talking about the Kava ceremony.
interesting.
Um,
Mm,
I'm gonna play it and then pause it, Masi, and then if you could give some feedback, and I'm gonna bring up the Vita Fales because I think this is a huge, huge differentiator,
mm.
right? When you look at the structure of the Samoan Kava ceremony, and then you connect it to the Tuitongas, it is not on the same level of sophistication. Is what
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
gonna get into. So what he's saying is he first earlier he covers about the post in the middle of the
Correct.
house, and then the fale is built all around it, right? And at the center, at the very top, is the lashing that
Mm-hmm.
connects the sky to the bottom. And they said even, and I didn't know this, I don't know if you knew this, Masi, or not, but apparently in that because it's the Tau Olunga is at
Mm.
the top and the Tau something Lalo, I think, or whatever at the bottom, that they would bury people under that post sometimes.
Really?
That's what he says earlier in the video. Oh, shoot. I'm
Okay.
not even showing the right one. My bad.
Oh no, I thought you were starting. Sorry, if you could go, yeah, because I thought you were gonna bring it up, but I didn't know you already start playing it.
Yeah, my bad. Let me
No,
see if
you're
I
good.
can
You're good.
just refresh the video here because it's time marked.
Okay.
And what this house looks like, you have the central post in the middle, and
Mhm.
then on the left it faces the Malay. That's where you enter from, the guests enter from. And then at the back is where the ava is served from, and where the family sit, serving the guests. And then the most high-ranked people sit the top and the bottom. So when you enter, it's to the right and to the left.
Alors voilà une configuration de
So that's what he's describing as the structure of the kava ceremony. So kind of give
Mm.
some thoughts on that, Mussy, while I pull up the the Tongan
Okay.
the Tongan
I just have a quick question. So
Tuitongas.
what? So the middle is the post.
Yes,
Is that what it is? And that's a post
yes.
of like what? Like a post on
That's
a
the
pole? Like a
primary post. Yes, that's the primary pole of the structure of the fade, and that
okay.
is basically the what you call weight bearing or structural piece
Mm.
that holds up the entire fale. And then it has a so it has that's the vertical piece. then it has a horizontal piece, and then there's that lashing, and that's the
Yeah.
primary frame of the house is built off of that structural framing. And he's
Okay.
expressing here that that's what the Kava circle in Samoa is based out of. So the front is the malae, that would
And
be
that's
kind
where
of like that
people,
open space. That's where the
yeah,
guests
oh,
come in
guest comes in, and then the top chiefs, like,
on
and
the
these are
north and the south.
all right. I wonder, does he give an explanation of like what's considered top? Because usually, usually you kind of have a certain top of like ali'i kind of thing. Because like, or is there multiple ali'is with different villages? That's the thing. That's interesting. I would ask. Because if it's like what you get a like a Maria Toa and like somebody of a Tamasese, like the Tuya Tua title holder, like because they're both significant. Who would be higher
The
than the
higher
other?
ranking. Yeah.
Yeah, see, that would be my question on that because he has two Matai Ali'i. I can see this working for like villages who there's multiple Ali'i title holders. That makes sense. So you can put two. But yeah, that's kind of my question regarding this. Like, because what happens if you get like the Maria Toa and like Tamasese Tuya Tua, which are the one of the bigger ones. I mean, there's the other ones, the what is it, the Mataafa, and
Mm. Is there
there's the
like
other one, the Tui
there's
Maria
no
Fano.
official ranking amongst those Masi? How do they determine who when it comes to these things?
Um, see, I just know by I think they've all decided. I know the recent one, who's the head of state now, that Maria Fano. He's the
Hmm.
more recent one out of the other three. Mataafa, he's more well known, kind of in their area in the back of Upolu. They're kind of like in that Adepata kind of area. Um, but the Tuya Tua, which is the Tamasese one, I know they have some kind of direct connection to Salamasina, from my understanding, and that's why they're kind of elevated because Salamasina is known as the only
Unifier, right?
unifier of Samoa, and Maria Toa is really high too because that was a title created from the Tuitonga, from his, pretty much from his mouth. So
Yeah.
that gives it significance. So that's why I put those two as the higher ones. The other two, I think they're just more from influence or work, kind of like the Tui Polu Tua.
Yeah, do
It's created, but
administrative stuff.
yes, and he gained influence by the work he was doing, and I feel like those two come from there. Of course, they have ties to the old, but the other two are pretty significant, from my understanding. And I'm just thinking, how would this thing work if, let's just say, Maria Toa, which is obviously the paramount, like the highest, if you're doing it in his kind of region, right? But
Hmm.
what's gonna happen if you get all four in one of the Kava? See, that's the thing I would. Those are the questions I would ask. Kind
Yeah.
of thing. If there's only
It,
two spots
it's
for two
it sounds
Matayali.
to me it's not a very clear and established hierarchy, right?
Hmm,
So because it is so distributed, it's communal. That's why it gets a little messy. Because even in Tongan, basically in Tongan structure, it's pretty straightforward for the most part,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Where the rankings are. This is why it was in a way complicated between Tupo the first and Laufiri Tonga, because there's a difference between political and military power and
mm,
religious power. And religious power is very difficult because religious power can quickly turn into military and political power,
correct.
but it's not always easy for military and political power when there is a pre-existing religious authority. You would have
Mm,
to get rid of the religious authority, but in getting rid of the religious authority, you risk uprising amongst your people, right?
Yeah.
And that's what made the relationship between Tupou the First and Laufilitonga pretty complicated, right? Because
Yes.
Tupou the First was building a new government, a new system through a new religion,
Yeah.
right? And the Tuitonga was not having the same influence in the new religion as the old.
Yes.
So yeah, so it sounds like it's a little bit more complicated. But what I wanted to walk through is, so basically the Kava ceremony in Samoa is based off of basically the structure of a house, right? And
Yeah.
that's what it's driven by, according to this guy. Granted, there may be other people who have different interpretations, but it's driven off of, you know, the marae, the community space, the marae.
Mm.
That's where people are coming in, and then you would have the highest ranking chiefs on the north side and the south side. Um, okay, pretty straightforward. All other chiefs sit here, but the two main ranks seems to be sitting here. Um, so this is interesting. When you come to the Furitaunga, and we'll start here with the Tuitonga,
Mm.
it is much more sophisticated in how it is structured, right? So the Furitaunga, the most powerful person sits across
Correct.
from the Tanoa, not on the north side or the south side, sits directly across. And why is this significant? This is why the supreme leader is referred to as
The sun.
the sun, because that is a direct representation of the equator.
Mm.
And that's where the head sits, right? And that's what, and it's called the Olovaha, and obviously the Tano. Then you have multiple, it's not just the top and the bottom, but it's tied to the cardinal directions. These are other specific locations and roles for specific people. And you, as in the Samoan one, you enter and come through what would be considered in the Tong and Kava circle the sacred space, where you don't. There's
Yeah.
roads that the entry points are from here,
Mm.
right? You don't come and interfere in the sacred space over
Mm.
here if you're coming in and out.
Mm.
So this is, once again, so this is the Tuitonga's Kava, right? Was called the Furitaunga. When the last Tuitonga installed Tupou the First is Taumafa Kava, it is very similar, except the Farefa reversed the structure.
Yeah. And
And
looks like added the Toa Eki too, because there's no Toa Eki in the
yeah,
Furitaunga.
that's true. That's interesting. And I'm wondering if it's because the Toas, and I mean the shifting of power, political
Correct.
power, but traditional
Yes.
power,
Traditional.
yes,
Yes.
maybe in other areas than what the Tuitonga. Because when the Tuitonga is there, no one should have Eiki or anything, because he is the
Yes.
supreme in there.
Correct.
So interesting. I never saw that
Yeah.
before.
And that's where the bloodlines of the Tungi, which is the Tui Hatagalaua, bloodlines of Kalanivalu that traces back to the Tui Tonga, they sit there, and that's why that changes to the Toa Eki with a different name, just so that
Mm.
it can be applied, properly, and edit, with good Tongan etiquette, because
Yeah,
you're not outranking the current modern king of the Tui Kangpon.
interesting. And then we'll come back to the right. So we see here, right, the equator. We see it's not just the middle to the north and middle to the south. There's also four positions of significance, as well, and the corners. We'll call it the corners of the circle, even though there's not really a corner. I just say corner because you can draw a square out
Hmm.
of these 4 points. Now, that has a lot of significant astronomical knowledge. So number one, this is, east to west, the movement of the sun in direction. We also have the equinoxes, dates, the cardinal directions, right? And this is the same etching that you'll find on the top of the ha'amonga, that you will find this double V structure throughout the Americas, and you will even find this double V structure in Egypt, right? So we're looking at a very sophisticated Kava ceremony here, and it represents multiple things. So it also represents the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, and the equator. It also represents the two tropics, right? And then we're looking, when we start looking at these things, and we should probably have one of the videos we'll have with Tevita Fale is to walk through this. This also represents, when you look at the design of the karia, the double outrigger canoe, and this is the water that goes underneath between the two outriggers is called the olovaha. Where is that term olovaha that I saw right there at the top, right? Because that's the center where the water goes underneath the double outrigger canoe. You seem like you had a comment, Masi.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say that if any of our viewers, that understands the Samoan structure of the kava bowl that we have here, because yeah, those are the questions I would have. How would that function for like a whole national, let's just say national of
Kava ceremony.
kava ceremony? How would that look like with because if there is four supreme title holders, or they don't do that and they just do it by region, so that it makes sense why they do it that way. But yeah, that's all. If anyone knows, because
To answer that question. Yeah.
yeah.
And then also a last thing here is this also is a representation with the boat in conjunction with the Tangaloa, the Ha'amonga in the sky that runs across the equator. Right? So I mean, the reason why we're having and showing this is really to kind of, when we say we need the evidence. Well, it's sophistication, it's the depth of the knowledge of the heavens, and that knowledge is duplicated in a physical, quote unquote, cultural action and structure. And that is why we make the claim that it just seems to make more sense of the Tuitonga being from the greater empire, and that Tangaloa comes from Tonga, and the Tuitonga inherited that title from the Tangaloa because it's a continuation of this knowledge, this sophisticated structure. Any thoughts? Any additional comments, Mas?
Nope. Agree. Just those questions with the, because granted, I'm not too sure with the Samoan structure of their kava ceremony, because I can see it functioning properly when you're doing it by a village, right? You can have two ali'i. There's kind of multiple ali'i title holders, and then the lower chiefs kind of have their spot around. But I'm just trying to understand what happens if you get like you know Marietoa and Tamasese, Tuyatua title holders, where specifically, and to me, if it makes, there's got to be significant reasons too, unless it doesn't matter if they sit on that side or on the on the north side or the south side of the lead. There's got to be, I don't know, maybe a
An
information that,
explanation. Yeah.
yes, there's got to be a reason, unless it doesn't matter. But
One would
but yeah,
assume it would, right?
yeah, but yeah,
Okay.
that's all. Just those would be my questions.
All right. I think this might be the last bookmarked.
Okay.
The image is how the house is built around, almost as if the architecture is a diagram for the social relations of people that sit and make the space an important.
Alors, il disait que l'architecture
So
Interesting.
he's just kind of once again re-emphasizing that the Kava ceremony is a representation or duplication of this faleula or that temple or the major
Yeah.
house structure in Samoa.
Yeah. No, and just to go back to it, when you talked about the double V, isn't there a double V also on the the Kumete Maui, which is a certain build
Yes.
Kumete. So yeah, just to kind of just go back and just mention how that's an important significance because it's not only in our astronomical evidence but also in our cover the Tanoa, the Kumete, Maui, which
Yes.
is which is which is tied named after Maui because Maui is the most skillful navigator in Polynesia and has to have his Kumete with the double V that's on top of the Ha'amonga. But yeah, I just thought I would just share that. But yeah, no, that house structure that is interesting. The Fare Samoa or Fare Tele. Interesting because I'm just trying to think what happened. Like is that ceremony only? Like I said, I'm just repeating myself, but is that? I'm just trying to figure out how would it work if you have all four of the top 55 title holders,
Yeah.
where they sit because you only have two. There's the other two. Are they gonna sit with the lower chiefs? To me, that sounds like another funny story that will come out that will create chaos. But but yeah, that would be my question. Because yeah, and it only and if it doesn't, it only kind of strengthens our argument that Samoa was never really one nation kind of thing. You can only do things in certain regions to function properly
Yeah.
because they all have their own rules.
10-4. Right. Well, I'll give my closing thoughts, Masi, and then you can close us out
Yeah.
for the day. Um, you know, was great to walk through this. This is probably the most comprehensive discussion I've ever had on the Samoan Mounds and into the details of the Tui Manua and the Tangaloa oral history. Um, and it was good. I mean, every like we experienced when it's tied to a physical
Mm,
structure or ruin, you can tell that the story makes sense. It flows, and then when it's purely oral history, things just go all over the place. And so that's one of the reasons why I know some of our especially on TikTok, it's a
mm,
little bit on YouTube, but especially on TikTok, they always kind of say, why do you need ruins for? You don't need ruins to prove that there was an empire. And I'm like, well, this is a prime example tonight as to why ruins are significant.
yeah.
When you don't have physical markers to tie the story to, it becomes tedious, and you're like, man, no wonder why the Palangis thought we were just savages and chewed and made lala stuff up and chewed coconuts. um but really really appreciate the our ancestors. They did do some fantastic things. I think we just got to sieve and sort out the crazy stories,
Mm,
or at least the ones that we can't tie directly to something that can ground the story.
mm,
But really appreciate that. Rainwater, thank you for the love.
mm.
Javier, welcome. Mahalo, Bito.
Mahalo.
um you're catching us on the tail end, Javier, but I really appreciate it. I just want to reemphasize, enjoy learning more. We enjoy having conversations. We want to invite people to have the conversations,
Mm,
and let's throw the ideas on the table and watch them wrestle with each other and
yeah.
see. You decide which one you think won, and you can make your own decisions and choices based off of what data and stuff you see. Any additional thoughts, Mas?
No, thank you, Tua, for this episode. Enjoyed it. Thank you to the viewers for participating. Always a great interaction with you all. Hopefully, this is helpful to talk about our ancestors. We're just trying to have this discussion talking about the Tui Manua. We're all one people. We're just trying to understand where did we come from and where did the empire start from and headquartered. And once we get that, we can have all the same understanding of Polynesian history. Because right now we're still trying to figure that out. And no, just enjoy. We're all learning, and also just like what I mentioned earlier, if anyone with knowledge of the Samoan structure of the Ava, we would appreciate, or even their view of the Tui Manua, of why this is the headquartered empire that kind of sprung out to the rest of Polynesia. We're open to that. I don't think we've gotten anybody yet, Tua,
No.
so far, but it's just a discussion. It's don't feel some type of way that we're trying to look down or talk down or the other ones. We're just trying to understand the truth. This is our position. It's been it's we feel very confident about it, and we try to break it down to make it um, easy to understand. And yeah, but thank you everyone for watching and enjoying this Polynesian Eyes podcast for this episode. Until the next time.
Sweet. Stay curious. Ask the hard questions. And until next time, malo.
Mahalo. See ya.